Hello and welcome to this video from Billingsgate Roman House and Baths virtually. We all work at Billingsgate Roman House and Baths. My name is Kim Biddulph. I'm joined by Howard Bench. Say hello.
Hello. Hi.
And Andrew Lane.
Hello.
And if you've seen any of our videos, you've met us all before. But we are also joined by a guest today, who is Rebecca Stott. And Rebecca is a professor of literature and creative writing at the University of East Anglia. And very excitingly for us at Billingsgate Roman House and Baths, her next novel is going to be set for quite a lot of the time at Billingsgate, at our site, which is really amazing. Now, this is going to be a slightly different video to the ones that you've watched before, if you have. We're going to be having a bit more of a chat about Rebecca's creative process when writing the novel and all the research that she's had to do. So we're not going to necessarily be sharing a screen all the time, screenshots and images all the time, but we might do that from time to time. So I'm just going to come out of screen sharing now. And you might be able to see us a bit bigger this time. We've always been tiny little videos in the corner, but now you know what we look like.
Hello.
So hello, Rebecca.
Hello.
Thank you very much for agreeing to talk to us.
Pleasure.
It was really great because we met at the London Archaeological Archive, I think, maybe a couple of years ago now.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
And we were very excited to hear that you were starting on writing about the bathhouse. Now, what was it that kind of got you into that?
It's always really interesting being asked where a novel comes from, or and particularly this one. When I tell people or explain to people I'm writing a historical novel set in the 6th century, it's like, isn't that like the really dark bit? Darkest bit of the Dark Ages, the darkest bit of British history. Like, why would you go there? And it is interesting, I've been realising recently that actually one of the places this novel began was the amazing Pompeii exhibition at the Museum of London, at the British Museum a few years ago.
Oh, yeah.
And walking through those incredible reconstructed spaces and looking at the objects that came up out of Pompeii, things like the empty cot, the charred cot, and also the amazing it looks like a sculpture, but it's the body molds of the young family that had been thrown apart as
that was
the child sitting on that. Yeah, really harrowing. And I think that's where it began for me. And then soon after, going to the Museum of London and seeing the brooch. So that was the second part of the kind of inspiration. So when I say the brooch, for people who don't know what the brooch is, a brooch was dropped by, we presume, a Saxon woman in the ruined bathhouse, probably 50, 100 years after the city was abandoned by the Romans. So we've got a derelict city. What we don't know is why the people, the Saxons and other Romanized Britons, who were living and farming around the ruined city, why didn't they go in? Because there's so little of their stuff. There's, it's clear from archaeologists that, there are bits, but there's so little. But here was a Saxon brooch. So evidence that a Saxon woman had walked into and across the broken roof tiles of the bathhouse, of the Billingsgate Bathhouse. And that for me was, a shiver moment, as in, who could she have been? What might she have been in there for? Was she looting? Was it a tryst? Was she on the run from something? Was she a squatter, perhaps? Who was she? And there was nothing that would help me build that set of probabilities other than my imagination. So that's where I began, really. So my novel's set in 500 AD, so about 80 years or so after the Romans left, although they didn't leave all at once, but they left probably in waves. But about 80 years or so into the life of the derelict city. So, a huge Roman city, a mile wide, with walls around it, abandoned, and in she goes. So that's my world that I had to build from the bits and pieces that we have.
Yeah, it is an amazing thing to have. We've got quite late occupation at Billingsgate for London in the Roman period, and then we've got this really early brooch, which is, I know that you have kind of changed the time to be about AD 500, but the brooch might be a bit earlier, might be about AD 450, which would be amazing if it was. But yeah, that's.
But of course, if the brooch was 450. She could still be wearing it at 500, couldn't she? You know.
That's it. Yeah. I mean, how do you date these things? But it's dated similarly to one that was found in Surrey of Mitcham, in a burial in Mitcham, and that was buried with someone. So presumably that person had it for a while, and then and decided to be buried with it, so that might have been made a few 30 years earlier or something. Yeah. It's difficult, this whole dating business.
I know, I've discovered to my peril. But yes, after a while, I think as a novelist you have to just abandon those concerns. You've done enough research to know that the date of the brooch was roughly this, could have been anything between this date and this date. And so at some point, if you keep being obsessed with those things, then the world doesn't appear. So I have an abandoned city. And that was interesting to me. So I guess one of the things we'll be talking about today is the way in which a novelist builds a world. And I've been working on this for 2 years now, maybe more, under the mentorship of Roy Stevenson, who works at the Museum of London. And we've had symposia about it. We've had discussions about what the bathhouse might have looked like, about what it might have been used for, what the city might have looked like. I've been thinking about all kinds of things that interweave, like what does a city start to look and smell like when it's been abandoned for 80 years? What kind of animals and indeed plants would be flourishing in there? And it was Roy, actually, I wonder if I can pull up some of these images in a minute. It was Roy who got me thinking about using contemporary ghost cities or abandoned cities. So the one that he got me to look at, and of course there were loads and loads of images, is Pripyat, which is the city that was abandoned after the Chernobyl explosion. That was, of course, it was a radioactive city, so great big fences were put up around the whole area, the exclusion zone, as it were. And Pripyat, big city, big concrete city, full of schools and shops and office buildings and high rises, completely abandoned. So shall I see if I can pull up one of those images?
Yes, please.
Just see if I can find it. It was here a few minutes ago. Here we go. So if I do this, here we go. Pripyat. Extraordinary image. I mean, that just really makes the hairs on the back of my neck stand up still. And there are thousands of these photographs taken probably by drones. This city has been abandoned for 30, 35 years, something like that. Whereas my city had been abandoned, Londinium, had been abandoned by about 80 years or so by this point. So, if this is what a city looks like after being abandoned for 35 years, then how much more, crumbled would Londinium have looked. And then, of course, you've got pictures like this. Again, it's really haunting. Here is probably a schoolroom. It looks like a schoolroom. On the walls there are, charts still and photographs of historical figures. But at the same time, the trees have grown up through the floor, so much so that they're actually growing out through the walls here. which, yeah, I mean, isn't that just amazing? So if you go back to the bathhouse, in fact, let's use this one, which is the most familiar one, which is your lovely artist's reconstruction of what the villa, the house and bathhouse.
Judith Dobie, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What we know from Peter Marsden's description of what they found when this came, when they looked in '68 in the dig, Peter Marsden, the archaeologist, is that there was a tree, at some point a tree had been growing through the bathhouse, you know, pushed up through this roof. But also the description is so beautiful in his book, because he describes how when finally the wall of the bathhouse went down here, the hill wash came through the gap or the crack in such a way that it fanned out across the floor. So that's one hell of a breakage, right? If you've got hill wash coming down, it must have come down this hill here, broken through this part of the north wall and into the bathhouse. So that's, I mean, I guess that could have happened over a long time. If you've got hill wash coming down, like a mudslide down the hill. So I was trying to imagine what this would have looked like in 500 AD, because my Saxon woman comes into the city and finds a group of squatters living amongst the ruins here. I won't say too much about that, you don't need to know about that, but I needed to figure out what part of these walls would still be standing. And indeed, would they have tried to patch up the walls? Would they have tried to patch up the roofs? Why would they have been living here? What use would it have been for them? And what kind of life might you eke out in a ruin of this kind? What would you need to do to clean it up to make everyday living bearable? So that's where I got,
I think it's amazing to think about that period when it's in its, you know, the gradual tumbling down, but could people still be there? And clearly somebody went in because we have that brooch.
Yeah.
I've got some. Sorry, we're all asking questions at the same time now. Actually, I've got a question around that, because there's a lot we do know as archaeologists, and there's a lot more we don't know as archaeologists. And I think sometimes visitors, viewers, people, they can find that frustrating that we don't know information, and we say it was possibly this. The brooch was possibly 450, it was possibly 480, it could have been kept as a family heirloom, could not have been, could have been new. So there's a lot of what ifs, and there's some larger what ifs as well, and questions that we don't know the answer to either, such as why was Londinium left? Why did people start settling to the west of the city, not in the city? And there's a lot of answers around that. Some are very religious, some are very practical and logical, but again, we don't know for sure. So I was, as you were talking, I was thinking, gosh, how do you answer those questions that may make a really big impact upon your narrative, upon your actual story?
That's such an interesting question. One of the things I do at UEA is to teach a course on historical fiction, and one of the things that we think a lot about is the history of mentalities, or the history of emotions. You know, that are we right to presume that if we try to occupy the mind of a Saxon woman at 500 AD, can we get anywhere close to the way in which she may have seen the world, her belief systems, her sense of superstition, her gods, her sense of duty, her sense of family or kinship, the things that she would have done in her day, you know, but her belief system more importantly. And I think that's one of the things that obviously is one of the most difficult tasks for someone like me, is we know so little about those things. We know so little about what a Saxon worldview might be. But there are certain things that we can guess, I guess, like, you know, we know the gods that they would have worshipped. We know that the stars would have been important, the tides would have been important. You know, there are certain things that you can put together from sort of common sense. But it seemed to me that one of the speculations about, you know, why didn't the Romanized Britons, the Saxons, who settled around the ruined city, why didn't they go in there? Some people have said, oh, well, they may have thought it was haunted. And I love that idea, because I think we probably would still feel like that a bit today to go into a ruined city, that it's creepy, but it's also dangerous. There are probably, you know, all kinds of hazards in there, smells, that would keep, you know, why would you go in there unless you were curious? So then you get into a whole set of questions about curiosity. You know, is that something that we have and the Saxons didn't have, or the settlers might not have had the, you know, but of course they would have gone. Somebody would have been curious enough to go in and have a look around, because my goodness, you know, these were stone buildings built on a huge scale. And so many people living in 500 AD in Britain would have been in small wooden communities, wooden built houses rather, and the kind of just grandeur and the carvings and the things that you could find in there, I guess, would have attracted very curious people. Does that answer your question a little bit, Howard?
It certainly does, yes. Yeah, it's just, as you were
What do you
talking,
think? Yeah.
what do I think?
Yeah.
I was just saying that it dawned on me the enormity of the decision you're taking early on affects the whole story. I think I would follow my own natural instincts, the way my mind works. So I think it's quite logical for people who are used to building in wood to not live in the city, because it would be pointless. They're just settling. They've got to look over their shoulder. They've got to provide food and water. They've got to trade, all those things. And you think about that pyramid, Maslow's pyramid. Think about that pyramid and think, what do you need to survive? The last thing you need is to start maintaining stone buildings and mosaics. You do what you know. So you build in wood, and you have your fire, and you keep your family dry. You keep your animals dry and safe, water, food, and then off you go. So for me, it's a sort of a logical way forward. But I'm not really that religious, so I'm not considering the religious aspects of it.
And I think that's really hard for us these days. I mean, some of the things we talk about in my sessions at UEA is, you know, if you're going to, for instance, try to reconstruct a world lived, say, during the Reformation or the dissolution of the monasteries, you know, if you're going to try to convincingly reconstruct anyone from that period, they've got to have an interior prayer life. You know, we've got to believe that they really believe in God, and it's not just pragmatic, or you know that is part of their interior world. Well, but that might not be very interesting to a contemporary reader, to occupy a religious sensibility. So all the time you're making decisions about, you know, trying to bridge into the past, show us people who we recognize and can identify with, and at the same time be true to their mindset. And I think a lot of people would say that this is a bridge too far. You know, going to the 6th century is just impossible, and we can't possibly recreate a mindset from, you know, a way of seeing a worldview from that period, and particularly a female. Looking at historical novels set in this period, they are almost exclusively about men on horses with swords. And usually there's Arthur in the background somewhere, and usually it's about one tribe massacring another. And that's what I also began with, is like, what was it, you know, if there are women in novels like that, they have war comparts, they are maids or sisters or, you know, victims of various kinds. So what I wanted to particularly explore was what it would be like to look through the eyes of a group of women in this period, you know, trying to scratch a living, trying to trade, trying to loot. I mean, my women are looters. They're stripping the city of its metal and selling it on. So there's a whole other question about metal and metalwork in this period that's really interesting. But yeah, so in a way, I've given myself a multiply difficult task. You know, not only is this the darkest period of British history, in that we have so little evidence and so few artifacts, but also I've chosen to look through the eyes of women, and there's even less material evidence, really. I mean, unless you start with the brooches and you start with the looms and the loom weights and all of that kind of material. So yeah, mad, really. But I keep going.
It's going to be very good. I think it was interesting thinking about the looting, because of course we do know that certainly the stone for the house was robbed out later. It might be much later in the kind of early English period, which is what I like to call it instead of Anglo-Saxon. Yeah. In the kind of maybe 9th, 10th, maybe even a bit later actually, centuries. And there's all of this really, really valuable material lying around in Londinium, ruined Londinium.
Yeah, and metal would have been scarce, and it was possible to smelt it down and make new things with it. So, you know, it seemed to me that if you needed a reason to not just visit the ruined city, but actually perhaps to live in it for a period of time, it might be because you were a looter, and that this is something that you did, you know, that you visited the various ruins and searched for hoards. I mean, you know, we know that as the Romans and the Romanized Britons left the city, they buried stuff. You know, they left coins and they left household gods, and, you know, sometimes they deliberately hid them, and other times they just abandoned them. Well, that means that certainly in the first 5 or 10 years after abandonment, going around the city looking for some of that stuff could potentially have been quite profitable. But then later, perhaps once you'd worked out that, you know, stripping the metalwork that pinned the buildings together would have been, you know, quite productive in terms of coming away with big amounts of lead or you know, whatever metal that you were collecting. I worked for a bit of time with a smith who works in Anglo-Saxon smithing methods, called Hector Cole. Amazing man. He works on making the pattern welded swords. Really interesting man. And he let me come and work with him in his forge, and showed me the kinds of methods that he used, and bellows that he used, and all of that. And in the middle of somewhere in the middle of the work that we were doing together, I said to him, you know, if you were Hector, if you were to go into the ruined city looking for metal, what would you be looking for? And he didn't even hesitate. I mean, this is a man in his 70s or 80s who'd been thinking about all of this for a very long time. He didn't hesitate. He just said, I'd be looking for the big nails. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, the Roman nails are so big, and, you know, they're good quality iron. So, and I said, well, how would you be looking for them, and where would you find them? And he said, well, you'd just be pulling doors off and window frames and any bit of furniture. And you'd probably make a really big fire there and then, burn the whole lot, and come back later and sift through the ashes, because, you know, that you're likely to have produced from that great fire a whole lot of great big Roman nails, big pieces of iron that could be smelted down for other things. So, you know, those sorts of technicalities of how you loot, what you're looking for, what kinds of things you might find valuable. But also, you know, they'd have been looking for hoards, I imagine. You know, they'd be looking down wells, they'd be looking underneath floorboards, perhaps in hypercourse, you know, looking for things that the Romans may have hidden. And so every now and again you might find a nice little stash of coins or some jewelry or something. You know? Yeah.
And just slightly, I suppose, incidental, but the dark earth that covers Roman London, and there's a lot of mystery surrounding dark earth, and I think it's probably because we call it dark earth. It's, you know, of the other world. Basically, it is a sort of a compost layer of vegetation, of trees and so on. A lot of seeds and pollen is picked out of there. But one of the things also you quite often find within dark earth is charcoal, and it did strike me, well, where's that come from? The charcoal, who's burning? You may have just perhaps pointed us in a direction.
Isn't there a Roman fort up on the Antonine Wall? Is it Inchterthil? I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, but Andrew, do you know it, where they buried all of the nails after the
huge number, yeah.
Because they didn't want the natives in Scotland to get hold of them, because, as you say, Rebecca, and Hector said, they seem to be very popular. Andrew, we have probably just over 5 minutes left. Andrew, were you trying to say something earlier and we haven't managed to let you?
No. I was just thinking about sort of, you know, how much stone and brick would be left there at the end of the Roman period, because, you know, we've all mentioned it. We're very conscious that the Romans reuse everything. And then you think, actually, if they move away from Londinium, it's just an amazing source of material. So I was just sort of trying to think to myself, I wonder how much of the walls would actually have existed, because, you know, with the Roman amphitheatre, for example, that falls into disuse before the end of the Roman period, so they get a chance to reuse the material themselves. But if we're talking about a building that's right at the end of the Roman period, then, you know, perhaps they're not going to reuse quite as much as they would have done, but then it's still got to be material that appeals to sort of, you know, the later people that are going to be around, because it's lovely cut stone, it's lovely tile, all those things. And we know that, you know, in the early churches, All Hallows by the Tower, you know, they're reusing lots of the Roman material there, so presumably there's still quite a lot of it left when they're rebuilding, you know, 100 and 200 years later. So it's a really interesting thing to start to think about.
Yeah, and what you would go for if you were going into the ruined city, you know, the obvious thing is, well, you might want wood and stone, but would you? You know, actually, it might not be that useful. It might not be as useful as metal might be, you know.
Yeah, absolutely, especially to begin with. But I think that the early English do start to build, once they are converted to Christianity, they build churches in stone eventually. So that's when there's a lot of kind of scavenging of the stone from Roman sites. You also mentioned about your women, your group of women who are the looters, and that about their some of them being basically the Britons who were there, or people who might have considered themselves Roman, I guess, and about their kind of heritage, where they might be from, because they're probably not all going to be, you know, white British, are they?
No, I mean, that's what was such fun, actually, was, you know, I've been keeping up with recent developments and recent discoveries, and it seems to me that's one of the things that archaeologists are particularly excited about in the sort of cross-rail excavations and so on, is just how cosmopolitan London was. And of course it was. I mean, it doesn't take much to realise that, you know, the Romans were trading with people all over the empire, and the empire was so big. So, you know, of course there were people living in London who were traders or people who had settled here from North Africa, for instance. So it seemed to me that the next logical step was, well, if a certain number of people who had maybe married here or settled here or just didn't want to go back to Rome might have settled, then some of those might have included some of that some of those cosmopolitan people who had lived in London under Roman rule. I mean, not huge numbers, but enough for it to be interesting. And so, yes, I've got a character who is from North Africa, or of North African descent. And I've also got, you know, so for me, the idea of this group of people living in the bathhouse, squatting, looting, trading, became more interesting as I started to think about what this community might be like if they had different belief systems, for instance, you know, that some of them worshipped one set of gods, some worshipped another. The kinds of botanical knowledge that they knew, for instance, might have been very varied. So somebody who came from North Africa and had a series of recipes that had been passed down, for instance, might include, might have knowledge that comes from a different belief system, a different scientific system. So it then becomes a novel that's interesting for our times, right? That the implications are a great empire has withdrawn and a vacuum has been created. Well, what happens then? What happens to the people who live in the vacuum? Particularly when you've got waves of migration coming over, so then it becomes a novel that, has echoes for us today, perhaps.
Wow, you've set yourself a big task.
Yeah. Yeah. Too right.
I believe you've got a picture of the very brooch that set this all off.
I do, yeah. And also, Howard, at the moment, my novel is called Dark Earth. In part as homage. I spent a lot of time reading about Dark Earth and the various theories about what it might be. And yeah, it gives me a sense of the kind of the darkness, the Gothic side of all of this. That this is a ruined city, it is a ghost city, and you've got layers of the past returning always. But yes, let me show you the brooch here. So this gives an impression. This is the brooch as it's framed in the Museum of London, and it's next to. So the broken one is the Billingsgate Bathhouse brooch that was found. About an inch across, maybe inch and a half at most, would you say?
Quite small, yeah.
Quite small. And next to it is the Mitcham brooch that it's been matched to.
So it's exactly the same. You can just see the patterns matching, yeah. So they must have been, their theory is they're made by the same jeweler.
Yeah. And that's intriguing, isn't it? Yeah. So Mitcham on the other side of the river, further down south. Yeah. How did these two connect? But yeah, it's a beautiful thing, and I love the fact that it sits in the Museum of London in a white corridor. I mean, this looks dark, but a white corridor that's completely blank, because the curators wanted to say, we know nothing about this bit, more or less. 400 years of London history that we know nothing about, and in the wall is this brooch.
Yeah,
it's the portal,
Yeah, it is a portal. The corridor links the Roman gallery and the Anglo-Saxon gallery, doesn't it? Yeah. So you can, when the Museum of London's reopened, you can go and see if you can hunt this out, but it is quite tricky to find.
Yeah, lovely thing.
It is. Now, I think we've got to. It's such a shame. We could talk for a long time about this subject, and I think it's really interesting that your working title is Dark Earth as well. I think that's wonderful. But we've got quite a time to wait, haven't we, before we're probably going to be able to read this.
Yes. Yeah, novels take a long time. Well, they take a long time to write. Historical novels take a really long time to write. Because you have to do all the research first of all. But then once you've got a finished manuscript, it goes to the publishers, and then it's a year before it's in the shops. That's because lots of things have to be done to it. It has to be scheduled, it has to be copy edited, proofread, all of those things. So I think the date that I am now working to is spring 2022, sadly. So I will submit the novel Dark Earth in January, and then it will come out the following January or February, something like that.
Oh, well, we're awaiting it with bated breath.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I can't wait. Is there anything that you want to say, Howard or Andrew? Anything else to mention?
I could talk for hours. I really could. I keep asking questions. I honestly, my mind's whirring round and round. I've got a whirling dervish going on up there at the moment. No, I'll stop there. And hopefully I'll catch up with Rebecca at another time, I think.
What about you, Andrew? Was there anything that you felt I was skew on?
Well, no, I mean, I have to be quite honest. It's a period that I really don't know very much about. So that's why I'm really intrigued by the fact that someone's chosen that period, because for me, it would always be like the Romans, and someone's gone to choose, you know, the bit that we don't really know anything about. So that makes it super interesting for me. Not only with, you know, the inspiration that you've taken, but I'm really looking forward to reading the book and looking at everything that you've looked into. So the inspiration behind it. So yeah, I'd say I'm looking forward to it.
Good, thank you.
It's filling a gap, because yeah, we do know about the Romans, and then we know about the later period, and yeah, that chunk in the middle, it's going to be really interesting to find out about for me.
Brilliant. Rebecca, if you could just come off your screen share, and I will screen share from here. Sorry, everyone who's watching. This is just what we have to do nowadays, isn't it? Hello, come on. Sorry. So hopefully this has come up, but I'm trying to scoot through to the last one, because what I would like to just say is, first of all, is thank you so much, Rebecca. This has been very, very interesting, and really only touched the surface of what we could talk about. If anybody would like to send any questions to us about Rebecca's talk, then you can do it. And I'm just trying to get to that slide, which is very annoying, but I shall read it out anyway. So you can find us on Twitter at LDN for November, Roman Baths, and send us a message there. You can find us on Facebook at Billingsgate Roman House and Baths, or you can find us on the City of London's website, cityoflondon.gov.uk/bathhouse, and there you'll find our email address as well. Can people send you questions on Twitter, Rebecca?
Yes, they can. Yeah, I have a Twitter account, Rebecca Stott 64.
Lovely, thank you. So thank you ever so much, everyone, for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it, but we can answer any questions if there's anything that's been left unsaid. But we'll say goodbye for now. Bye.
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 Bye.